Hi, this is Penny Sue Donnelly, and I'm doing Chapter 5, but only the second half. Matt is doing the first half. The chapter is called Lessons from Students on Creating a Chance to Dream. And I think Nieto is focusing our attention on the words chance and dream, and that's what I tried to do over here. So the first section that I wanted to talk about was this idea of tracking and ability grouping. And one of the first things I wanted to say was that she talked about the idea of teachers sometimes having more socialization goals for minority students than educational goals. And this is something that I really had to stop and think about. Was it something I had done? Was it something that I was in the process of doing? Has it ever happened? And so it just gave me a chance to reflect and really think about what she was saying. Second, she talked about students who are tracked by their ability or by testing, and how whatever track they're put in, they're liable to remain in that track for the rest of their schooling. Well, I had never heard of that term before in in elementary education, and so I was kind of unsure of what she meant by that. I know that in high school my daughter is on a college track, but I thought that that was something that all students chose themselves, that it was not chosen for them by the school. So that was one that I was not real clear on the concept. And then this third one, she says that challenging academic programs do more good for students than compensatory or remedial, which is kind of bad news for me because I'm in an interventionist position right now. So she's saying that that kind of program where you try to pull the children up, help them to gain, to close any gaps that there are in their learning, that program is not near as good as it is getting a program where they are challenged, sort of like a gifted program, where you put more in front of them and really enrich their thinking and challenge them. So she says, what is to be done, and she's got some very simple but not easy solutions. One is to stop tracking students. One is to de-emphasize grades and testing. And I put up here what I thought was a little humorous attempt to show what people thought of grades, specifically this one professor's blog. Dr. Ch may not find it so humorous, but I thought it was funny. But the idea of de-emphasizing grades and testing, and then this third one, which is the one that really caused me to think, and that's determining the real meaning of education. So I think this is a really good question for us as educators. Why do we do this? What are we expecting out of it? What are we really supporting here? What is education? What is it to us? What is it to our district? What is it to our state? Because, of course, our state is the one who sets most of these goals for us as teachers. So I think this is a really good place for us to stop and ponder and to reflect. What do we do? What do we stand for? So the next section she talked about were the students who gave some of their examples of times when they had either seen or experienced racism and discrimination. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's something that she does in every chapter. I did want to point out that she brings up this idea of institutional discrimination, which is something I've never heard of before, and that she writes that these discriminatory actions in schools come from basically everybody. They come from staff, from teachers, and from students. And for me, that just wasn't very surprising because sometimes people do some really, they make bad choices and they do some very foolish things and hurtful things. So I wasn't really surprised at that. So then she brings up these implications of what we should do with the information she gained from these students. How should that transform schools? And the first thing I wanted to do was remind you of her definition of multicultural education. She says it's basic for all students, pervasive, grounded in social justice, and based on critical pedagogy. The second thing she did was tell us what multicultural education is not. It's not being tolerant of other people and other cultures, and it's not just being sensitive to their culture. And then her bottom line, she wants multicultural education to be arrogance reduction. And she was referring to both individuals and to school policies and practice. So then she went into the idea of affirming students, not just affirming them as people, not just affirming them as students, but affirming their languages, their cultures, and their experiences. And she said we should do this not by just their individual strengths and weaknesses, but by looking at them as a group. And she says, and I quote, that when we do this, when culture and language are acknowledged by the school, students are able to reclaim the voice they need to continue their education successfully. And you can find that on page 120. So this part I entitled Chapter 5 Math. And she was talking about positive and negatives, and I don't even teach math, but that was the very first thing I thought of. So if you take a bunch of positives, you get a positive number. She said if you take the positive of a person's native language, you add it to the positives of their culture, that has positive effects on their achievement. However, if you use negatives, then negatives, for example, negating their language, negating their culture, causes something to be negated in them too. And I believe that this is very true, and we need to be very careful about this in schools. So here, I was having just a little bit of fun, and I put as the title, this news flash, resistance is encouraged in public schools. And when we see something like this, we might think, oh, somebody's not wearing their mask, or they're not socially distancing from each other. But that's not what she's talking about at all. She says that some of these students talked about the idea of resisting assimilation, or that they used language that gave her the idea that they resisted assimilation, and that when they kept their language and their culture, it led to higher academic achievement. And she says their other option was to adopt an oppositional identity, and she says that limits their chances of academic success. But over here, she does admit this isn't true for everyone. Some people felt like they should assimilate, and that helps them to be successful in school. And I went ahead and put the definition of assimilation, more for me than anything else, but just to help us remember, it means to absorb into the cultural tradition of a population or a group. All right, so on this one, she talks about listening to students. So I thought to myself, well, what does that mean? I listen to students all day long. But that's not what she's talking about. She doesn't talk about listening as though you were just hearing something, sound is hitting your ears. She said listen as though you're going to learn something, as though these students have something to teach you. And she says that when you do that, you should pair that with the idea that you are helping these students to take charge of their own learning. And they use it in ways that are productive. They produce something. And she gave the example of students who were researching their lunches, their school lunches. She talked about how they tested the temperature of the milk, how they found the catering company that brought the lunches, how they figured out how much taxpayers were paying for the lunches. They produced something, and when they did, they used critical thinking to do it. So when you are listening to students, and I feel like this is a really important point that she brought out, we listen not just to hear what they say, but to learn from them too. It's a give and take. And that we are empowering them to be in charge of their own learning as we listen. And then my last slide, because I'm trying to keep it short since Matt's doing one also. Students deserve to dream, and schools can create the chance for that to happen. And then she did this last quote that I want to bring up right here, where it says she wants total transformation of our schools, but also our hearts and minds. And this was just me making a quip here, and I thought she wanted something hard, because what she's asking for is big. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So the thing that I wanted to close with is this poem right here by Langston Hughes called Dreams, since we're talking about student dreams. It's one I've always liked, and I hope you'll read it and gain something from it. I thank you for listening. I appreciate that very much, and I hope you have a good week, and I will see you on the discussion board.